Jake was just an ordinary man. He was a mechanic on a small, peaceful colony on a distant planet. He had a simple life, fixing ships and helping with repairs. He wasn't a fighter, and he wasn't interested in being famous or powerful. He was content with his quiet job and humble home. The colony had been around for years, and most of the people living there were simple settlers. They didn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. Life was calm. They grew food, built houses, and helped each other out. Everything seemed peaceful. One day, that peaceful life changed. The sky above the colony cracked with a loud roar. A spaceship, large and unfamiliar, fell from the heavens and crashed not far from the colony. It was a fiery ball of metal and flames, leaving behind a trail of smoke. The people of the colony were in shock. They had never seen anything like this before. As the colony leaders discussed what to do, Jake was asked to help. He was the one with the most skill in fixing ships. Despite his lack of interest in space travel, Jake was always the one people turned to when something broke. He grabbed his toolbox and headed towards the wreckage. When Jake arrived, he found the spaceship half buried in the ground, smoking but still intact. The outside was dark and dented, but there was no sign of fire or explosion. He carefully stepped closer, his heart racing with curiosity. To his surprise, the hatch of the ship opened. A figure slowly stepped out, and Jake was stunned. It wasn't a human. The figure was tall, slender, and covered in strange armor that glowed faintly. The person inside the armor removed their helmet, revealing a face that was both alien and beautiful. Her skin was a soft shade of blue, and her eyes were a bright, shining silver. Long, silken hair framed her face like a golden halo. The alien woman was no ordinary traveler. She looked around, taking in the surrounding landscape with a mix of confusion and awe. Her eyes scanned the colony, as if trying to understand where she had landed. The people gathered around, whispering in amazement and fear. Jake approached cautiously. He had heard of aliens before, but this was the first time he had ever seen one up close. The woman looked at him, her gaze full of authority and power. She was clearly not a regular traveler. She had the air of someone important, someone who was used to being treated with respect. "Who are you?" Jake asked, trying to hide the awe in his voice. "I'm Princess Lyra of the Indarian Empire," she replied, her voice calm and regal. "I come in peace, but I need help." Jake nodded, still in shock. He had no idea how to help an alien princess, but it was clear that the situation was urgent. He glanced at the wrecked ship, noticing the damage to its engines and hull. It wasn't something he could fix in a few hours, but maybe he could make a start. "You need repairs," Jake said. Simply, he didn't know what else to say. He wasn't a diplomat or a soldier. He was just a mechanic. "Yes," she said, "but I also need something more. I need to reach my people. They must know what has happened." Jake didn't know much about space travel, but he understood enough to know that this ship was far from ordinary. It was advanced, much more than anything the colony had. Fixing it would take time, but Jake was sure he could get it working again. He was a mechanic, after all. He motioned for her to follow him. "I can help with the repairs, but it will take a while. You'll have to stay here until it's done." Princess Lyra seemed hesitant at first. She wasn't used to being stuck in one place. She was a princess, after all. She was used to luxury and command. But there was something in Jake's calm manner that made her trust him. She followed him toward the colony's repair bay, where he worked on ships and equipment. As they walked, Lyra couldn't help but watch him closely. He was just a man, an ordinary human, but there was something different about him. Most people would have been overwhelmed by the situation, but not Jake. He seemed unfazed by the presence of an alien princess and the situation they were in. He treated her like she was just another person in need of help, not some royal figure to be revered. When they reached the repair bay, Jake began inspecting the ship's engines. He muttered to himself, looking over the damage. Lyra stood nearby, watching him with interest. She had been in many places, met many people, but she had never met someone like Jake. Most humans were either terrified or overly curious about her. But Jake, he just worked. I need to remove the outer panel here, Jake said, pointing to the side of the ship. It's going to take a few hours, but I can make it work. Lyra nodded. Do what you must. Jake wasn't used to dealing with royalty, but he wasn't going to treat her any differently than he would anyone else. He started working, pulling out his tools and getting to work on the damaged panels. Lyra stood silently, observing. She didn't say much, but Jake could feel her eyes on him, studying him in a way that made him feel uncomfortable. After a while, Jake took a break and turned to her. Are you hungry? He asked. Lyra looked at him, surprised by the question. Most people, especially those who were in awe of her, wouldn't dare ask such a simple thing. But Jake had asked without thinking. I could use some food, she replied. A small smile forming on her lips. Jake offered her a plate of food from the colony's mess hall, and they ate in silence. For a moment, it was just the two of them, an ordinary man and an extraordinary alien princess. And in that silence, something began to change for Lyra. She was beginning to realize that Jake was not just any man. He was brave in a way she hadn't expected, and she was starting to see him in a new light. As the sun set over the colony, Lyra thought to herself, perhaps this man isn't so ordinary after all. The next morning, Jake was back at work, his hands deep in the machinery of Princess Lyra's ship. He had worked through the night, focused on repairing the damage to the engines and ensuring that the ship would be able to fly. Again, Lyra had watched him carefully, but she said little. She wasn't used to being in such a position, relying on someone else to fix something important. Yet, there was something about Jake's calm demeanor that made her feel at ease. He didn't rush. He didn't ask for praise, and he never seemed to falter in his work. Lyra knew that she had to leave soon. Her people were waiting for her, and if she didn't return soon, they would think she was lost forever. But at the same time, she felt a strange reluctance. The simple life on this quiet planet was something she had never experienced. The people here were kind, and Jake, though ordinary in her eyes at first, had shown more courage and strength than many of the warriors she had known. As Jake worked, Lyra stood beside him, trying to keep her thoughts from wandering too far. But just as she thought she could relax for a moment, a loud warning signal interrupted the silence. Jake quickly turned, his face hardening. What is it? Lyra asked, her eyes flashing with concern. Jake moved quickly toward a nearby screen and tapped a few buttons. The display showed an incoming fleet, large, dark ships with weapons that glowed ominously in the distance. They're here. Jake muttered under his breath. It's them. They've come for you. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the ships instantly. They were from the Black Talon faction, a group known for their ruthlessness and aggression. They had once been allies of her people, but betrayal had led to a bitter war. She had been sent to escape, but she had no idea that they were following her. The message that came through on the screen was harsh and filled with demands. Princess Lyra. The voice of the enemy commander crackled through the comms. Return to us immediately. You have no place here. Surrender, and we may allow you to leave in peace. Refuse, and we will burn this planet to the ground. Jake's fist clenched, his jaw tightening in anger. He had never seen the face of the enemy before, but this threat made his blood boil. He wasn't about to stand by and let them harm the people here. They're not going to listen to reason, Lyra said quietly, stepping closer to Jake. She looked at the map of their colony, seeing the ships approaching. There was no time to waste. The colony didn't have the weapons to fight back, and Jake had no way of calling for help from anyone outside. It was just him, Lyra, and the people of this planet. Jake turned to face her. We need to prepare. We can't let them just take you. Lyra's eyes widened, unsure of what Jake meant. Prepare? What can we do against them? Jake's face hardened. We fight. If they want to fight, they'll get one. I may not have a fleet or an army, but I know this land, and I know how to use what we have. Lyra couldn't believe what she was hearing. A simple mechanic, a man who had never seen war, was talking about fighting off an entire alien fleet. But something in his voice told her that he wasn't just talking to hear himself. He believed they had a chance. For the first time, Lyra saw Jake for what he truly was, not just an ordinary man, but a man who had the courage to stand up against overwhelming odds. She had known warriors in her life, soldiers who had fought for power. But Jake was fighting for something different, something greater. He was fighting for the safety of people he didn't even know. "Tell me what we need to do," Lyra said. Her voice firm. Jake didn't hesitate. "We need to get the people ready. We'll use the natural defenses around here, caves, forests, and the old equipment in the storage. We can create traps, block their weapons, and use the land to our advantage." As he spoke, he quickly began to organize the colony's leaders and the able-bodied men and women into groups. Everyone had a role to play. Some were sent to set up traps along the outer perimeter of the colony, while others worked to create makeshift weapons from whatever they could find. Lyra, despite her royal status, immediately joined in. She had fought before, though not in this way, but she knew how to defend herself. She had trained with the best soldiers in her empire. However, she knew that this wasn't a battle she could win with strength alone. The enemy had superior numbers, better weapons, and more experience in warfare. Jake, on the other hand, didn't think about the odds. He just kept working, keeping everyone focused. His calmness spread to the others, who had once been scared but now found themselves working together, driven by a single goal: survival. By the time the enemy ships reached the colony's atmosphere, they had a plan in place. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they could do. The colony would use the terrain to force the enemy into a trap. The key would be to outsmart them, to catch them off guard. As the enemy forces began to land, Jake and Lyra stood together at the edge of the colony. The sky was filled with the dark ships, and the ground shook as they touched down. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest, but he refused to show fear. Lyra stood beside him, her regal demeanor still intact, but her eyes were filled with a mix of worry and determination. "Are you ready?" she asked. Jake nodded. "Let's do this." The first wave of enemy soldiers emerged from their ships, weapons raised. They didn't expect a fight from the humans. They thought it would be an easy conquest. But as they stepped into the traps set by the colony, they were caught off guard. Explosions rang out as makeshift weapons fired, and the enemy soldiers were thrown off balance. Jake led the charge, moving swiftly through the forest with a small group of fighters, attacking the enemy from the rear. The battle was intense, and Lyra fought alongside him, using her agility and skill to take down anyone who came too close. Despite being outnumbered, the humans had one thing the enemy didn't: the will to fight. As the enemy forces struggled to regain control, Jake's voice echoed through the comms. "We've got them. Keep pushing." Lyra couldn't believe it. This ordinary man, this mechanic who had once seemed so unsure of himself, was now leading a fight for survival. And somehow, they were winning. The battle had only just begun, and the enemy was already struggling to regain control. Despite their advanced weapons and trained soldiers, they were not prepared for the surprise that Jake and the colony had set up for them. As explosions echoed in the distance, Jake led his small group of defenders deeper into the forest. His eyes never stopped scanning the area, his mind constantly thinking about their next move. Lyra fought beside him, her movements graceful and sharp. She was trained for combat, but what surprised her most was Jake's calmness under pressure. He didn't panic or give up. He kept leading, kept thinking, and kept fighting. He wasn't a soldier, but in that moment, he was proving to be more than just a mechanic. He was the heart of the defense, and the others looked to him for guidance. The enemy forces weren't taking their setbacks lightly. They regrouped quickly and began pushing forward, determined to crush the human resistance. But Jake wasn't backing down. His mind was sharp, and he knew that this battle wasn't about brute force. It was about strategy and using the land to their advantage. "Keep them on the move," Jake said, his voice steady and confident. "We can't let them get comfortable. They'll make mistakes." Lyra nodded, trusting his judgment. She had fought in many battles before, but something about this one felt different. She had always fought alongside soldiers, but this was the first time she had fought with ordinary people who were not trained for war. And yet, they were standing strong, pushing back against an enemy they had no right to defeat, ready Princess, Jake asked, checking the weapon on his side. Lyra smiled, a rare thing for her. I was born ready. With that, they moved forward, weaving through the trees, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy. The forest around them was quiet, except for the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions. They had set up traps all around the area, and the enemy was slowly being forced into a corner. It was their chance to strike. As they approached the clearing, Jake signaled for everyone to stop. He crouched low to the ground. Pulling out a set of binoculars, he scanned the enemy's position, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. They had set up a small base, but there were gaps in their defense weak points that Jake had noticed during his earlier recon. He knew where they could strike. There, Jake said, pointing to a small hill where a group of enemy soldiers were gathered. That's our target. We can take them out without getting too close. Lyra looked at the group, nodding in agreement. I'll cover you from here, she said, drawing her weapon. You go in quietly. We don't need to give them a chance to regroup. Jake smiled, his heart beating faster. He had never been in a battle like this, but he wasn't afraid. He had a plan, and he knew that the people of this colony were counting on him. He motioned to his group, and they moved swiftly through the trees, silent as shadows. They had the element of surprise on their side as they approached the enemy's position. Jake's mind raced. He thought of the people he was fighting for as friends, the people of the colony, and even Lyra, the alien princess who had trusted him. He couldn't afford to fail. He couldn't let the enemy take this place. They reached the base without being detected. Jake and his team moved into position. Taking cover behind rocks and trees, he could feel the weight of the moment, the tension in the air. He took a deep breath, calming his nerves. On Jake's signal, the attack began. His group moved quickly, using the terrain to their advantage. They took out the enemy soldiers one by one, using silent weapons and making every shot count. It wasn't long before the enemy realized they were under attack, but by then, it was too late. Lyra, from her position in the trees, provided cover fire, picking off any soldiers who tried to escape. Her aim was flawless, and every shot she took hit its mark. Jake had never seen anyone fight with such precision and skill. She was a warrior in every sense of the word. The enemy began to retreat, realizing that they were losing the battle. But Jake wasn't about to let them get away. He signaled for his group to push forward, and they did, driving the enemy back toward their ships. They weren't going to let them take control of the colony. Not now, not ever. As the last of the enemy soldiers fled, Jake and his group stood victorious. They had done it. They had held their ground and forced the enemy to retreat. The battle wasn't over, but it was a huge victory for the colony. They had proven that they were not helpless, that they could stand up to even the most powerful of foes. Jake looked around at the people who had fought beside him. They were tired, covered in dirt and sweat, but they were proud. They had faced an overwhelming force and come out on top. It was a feeling Jake had never experienced before, but it felt good. Lyra approached him, a smile on her face. You did it, she said, her voice full of admiration. I didn't think it was possible, but you've proven me wrong. Jake chuckled. I didn't do it alone, he said. We all did it together. Lyra shook her head. No, you led them. You made them believe they could win. That's something no one else could have done. Jake shrugged. I just did what needed to be done. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about protecting the people I care about. Lyra smiled, her eyes softening. Maybe you're more than just an ordinary man, Jake. Jake looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. Maybe I am, he said as the dust settled. The people of the colony gathered around, cheering and celebrating their victory. They had won the battle, but Jake knew this was only the beginning. The enemy would return. But now, they were ready, and with people like Lyra by his side, Jake knew they could face whatever came next. The battle had been fierce, but the enemy forces had retreated, and the colony had held its ground. It was a victory that no one had expected, least of all Jake. He had always been just a mechanic, a man with no ambition for glory. Yet here he stood, among the people who now called him a hero. Jake didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired, his body aching from the hours of fighting and running. But as he looked around at the smiles and cheers of the people, something inside him stirred. They had fought together, and they had won together. And for the first time in his life, Jake realized that he was part of something bigger than himself. Lyra stood by his side, her expression calm, but her eyes filled with admiration. She had seen many battles in her life, but she had never seen a human fight like this. Jake, a man with no training, had led the defense of the colony. He had taken on the enemy with nothing but his wits and his courage, and he had won. "You did it," Lyra said quietly, her voice filled with respect. Jake shook his head, brushing the dirt off his hands. "We did it, all of us. This wasn't just me." Lyra smiled softly, but there was something more in her eyes now. She had always thought of humans as weak, unimportant creatures. But Jake had shattered that belief. He was brave, smart, and determined, and he had saved the colony. As the celebration continued, Jake slipped away from the crowd for a moment of peace. He wandered to the edge of the colony, where the trees met the open fields. He needed to clear his mind. He had never been part of something like this before. The fear and the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a strange feeling, pride, perhaps, or something more. Lyra found him standing alone, looking out over the land. She approached him slowly, not wanting to disturb his thoughts. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Jake nodded without turning to face her. "Just thinking." Lyra stepped beside him, her eyes following his gaze. "About what?" "About how things change," Jake said, his voice quiet. "A few days ago, I was just fixing ships. Now, I'm standing here after fighting off an army. It's hard to believe." Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. "You've always had this inside you, Jake. You just needed the chance to show it." Jake shook his head, still uncertain. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect any of it. I don't think I'm a hero. I'm just me." Lyra smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's what makes you a hero. You did what was needed, without thinking about fame or reward. You did it for the people here, and that's more than anyone could ask for." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He had never thought of himself as anything special. But hearing Lyra's words made him feel different. He had always kept to himself, content with his simple life. But now, he was beginning to understand that sometimes it wasn't about who you were, it was about what you did when the time came. As they stood together in silence, a new feeling began to grow inside Jake. It was a feeling of purpose, a feeling that he wasn't just an ordinary man. He was part of something much bigger. He had a responsibility now, not just to himself, but to the people who had fought beside him, to the colony that had become his home. The following days were filled with repairs and preparations. The enemy had been pushed back, but Jake knew it wasn't over. The Black Talon faction would return, and when they did, they would be ready. Jake worked tirelessly alongside Lyra and the others, reinforcing the colony's defenses and making sure they were prepared for the next attack. Despite the danger, Jake felt a sense of determination he had never known before. He wasn't just fixing ships anymore. He was building a future for the colony, a future where they could stand on their own. Lyra continued to train with the colonists, teaching them combat techniques and how to defend themselves. Jake wasn't much of a fighter, but he helped where he could, organizing supplies, setting up defensive lines, and making sure everyone knew what to do when the enemy arrived. As the days passed, the bond between Jake and Lyra grew stronger. They shared quiet moments, working together side by side, but also talking and laughing. It was clear that Lyra, who had once been a princess far removed from the struggles of ordinary people, had come to see Jake as more than just a mechanic. She had come to respect him and perhaps even admire him. One evening, as they worked late into the night, Lyra turned to Jake, her eyes full of something Jake couldn't quite understand. "I want to thank you," she said softly, "for everything you've done. I never would have thought a human could lead a defense like you did." Jake smiled, but it was a humble smile. "I didn't lead anything. I just did what I had to." "No," Lyra said firmly, her voice filled with sincerity. "You did more than that. You gave the people here hope. You showed them that even in the face of impossible odds, they could fight. You gave them the strength to believe in themselves." Jake looked at her for a long moment, his heart stirring. "I didn't do it alone." Lyra smiled. "No, but you were the one who made them believe." Jake didn't know what to say. He had never been one for speeches or words of wisdom, but he understood what she was saying. It wasn't about being the strongest or the most powerful. It was about doing what needed to be done, no matter the cost. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the colony, Jake realized that he was no longer just the quiet mechanic. He was something more, something he had never expected to be, and in that moment, he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage he had shown in the battle. He wasn't just an ordinary man anymore. He was a man who had stood up when the world needed him the most. Days had passed since the victory over the Black Talon forces. The colony was rebuilding, and Jake was busy working alongside the others to make sure their defenses were strong. Every day brought new challenges, but they had all grown stronger. From the battle, the people of the colony had learned how to fight back, and their confidence was growing. Yet, in the back of Jake's mind, a shadow of worry lingered. The Black Talon faction would not give up easily. They had retreated once, but Jake knew they would return. This time, they would be prepared. Jake and Lyra had spent many hours talking about what to do when the enemy came back. The colony didn't have the resources to take on the enemy in an open battle, but they had the land. They had the advantage of the forest, the caves, and the knowledge of their surroundings. They couldn't defeat the enemy with strength alone, but they could outsmart them. "Jake," Lyra said one evening as they sat together, looking over the plans for the colony's defense, "I don't want to risk your people's lives any more than I have to. If we don't stand a chance against them, we need to leave. I can take you all to a safer place." Jake looked at her, surprised by the offer. "We're not leaving. This is our home now. We're going to fight for it." Lyra didn't say anything for a moment, but Jake could see the conflict in her eyes. She had known war before, but she hadn't known this kind of fight. She had been raised to rule, to command, and to leave when the battle was lost. But Jake was different. He wasn't interested in running away. He wanted to protect the people who had welcomed him, who had fought beside him. "I know you want to protect everyone," Jake continued, "but we've already proven we can stand up to them. We'll find a way." Lyra didn't answer at first. She was still unsure about the best course of action. But Jake's determination was undeniable. It was clear that he wouldn't back down, no matter what the enemy threw at them. The next day, the enemy returned. This time, they had brought more ships, more soldiers, and more firepower. The colony had been expecting them, but even so, the sight of the enemy's vast fleet made Jake's heart race. He could feel the tension in the air as the enemy ships hovered above the planet, blocking out the sun. "We don't have much time," Jake said, turning to the people of the colony. "Get to your positions. Remember the plan. Use the traps. Stay hidden and wait for my signal." Lyra, who had been preparing with the soldiers, stepped forward. "Jake, I think it's time. We can't keep playing defense. We need to take the fight to them." Jake nodded. He had thought about this moment for days, and he knew that it was time to go on the offensive. The enemy was too strong to be left unchecked. If they waited any longer, they would risk losing everything. "I agree," Jake said, his voice steady. "But we'll do it our way. We'll use what we know, not just our weapons." The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would move the majority of the colony's defenders into the forest, where they would lay in wait. A small group would infiltrate the enemy's command ship, disable their communications, and create chaos. The enemy would be forced to deal with the unexpected, and that would buy them enough time to strike the main force. Jake knew this was a risky plan. He had no experience in combat, and the stakes were higher than ever, but he wasn't afraid. The people here were his family now, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. As the enemy fleet descended, Jake and his group of fighters moved quickly into the forest. Lyra, once again, was by his side, her weapon ready. She had trained for moments like this, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this fight. The enemy wasn't just an invader, they were a threat to everything she had come to care about. Jake led the way, his eyes scanning the area as they moved deeper into the trees. He trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him that the enemy would underestimate them. They would think they were just a group of farmers and mechanics with no chance against a full-fledged army. They were wrong. The plan was going well. At first, the traps they had set caught the enemy off guard, causing confusion and slowing their advance. But just as Jake had hoped, the enemy didn't anticipate the fight they were about to face. The colony's defenders fought fiercely, holding their ground with everything they had. Jake's group, meanwhile, moved toward the enemy's command ship. The journey was dangerous, but they managed to slip past enemy patrols, using the forest to conceal their movements. When they reached the ship, they made their way to the control room, where the enemy's communication systems were located. "We need to disable their ability to call for reinforcements," Jake whispered to Lyra, his voice tense. Lyra nodded, her expression serious. She knew what was at stake. She moved swiftly, working with Jake and the others to take out the ship's communication systems. They didn't have much time. The battle outside was raging, and they needed to act fast. Jake's heart pounded as he looked at the controls. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but he was determined. He pulled a lever, and suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. The communication lines went dead. "It's done," Jake said, his voice filled with relief. But as they turned to leave, they heard a loud bang from behind them. The door to the control room slammed open, and a group of enemy soldiers rushed in. Jake's heart skipped a beat. They had been caught. Lyra acted quickly, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him toward the door. "We need to move now." They ran. With the enemy hot on their heels, Jake's mind raced. They had done what they needed to do, but now they had to get out before the enemy captured them. The forest ahead seemed far away, but Jake wasn't going to stop. He couldn't stop. With Lyra leading the way, they managed to outrun the enemy soldiers, making it back to the colony just in time. The enemy was disoriented, and the colony's defenders had already gained the upper hand. The enemy's communications had been disabled, and they were forced to retreat. Jake stood panting, covered in sweat and dirt, as the last of the enemy forces fled. They had done it. The colony had won again. But this time, Jake knew something had changed. He had faced his fears, had taken on the impossible, and had led his people to victory. And as he looked at Lyra, he realized that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for a future. The days after the final battle were filled with a strange sense of relief. The enemy had retreated, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no immediate danger hanging over the colony. The people had come together, working side by side to rebuild their homes, their farms, and their lives. Jake was exhausted, both physically and mentally, but he knew that the work was far from over. There was still much to be done. Jake stood at the edge of the colony, looking out over the land they had fought so hard to protect. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the trees and fields. It was peaceful, quiet, and for the first time in a long while, Jake allowed himself to relax. The weight of the battles, the fears, and the uncertainty were finally lifting. They had won, and it felt like a victory that had changed everything. Lyra joined him, her presence quiet, but strong. She stood beside him, gazing out at the same horizon. She had been through so much, and so much had changed in such a short time. When she had first arrived on the planet, she had been a princess, used to luxury and command. She had never imagined that she would find herself fighting alongside a group of ordinary humans. And yet, here she was, standing by Jake's side after the greatest victory of her life. "You've done it, Jake," Lyra said softly, her voice full of respect. "You led them, and you kept them safe. You proved that even the smallest among us can make a difference." Jake didn't say anything at first. He didn't feel like a hero. He was just a man who had done what needed to be done. Someone who had taken on a challenge and fought for what was right. But as he looked at Lyra, he realized how much he had changed. He had started this journey as a simple mechanic, someone who would never have dreamed of fighting in a battle. But now, he was more than that. He was a leader, someone who had given everything to protect those he cared about. "I didn't do it alone," Jake replied, his voice quiet but firm. "We all did it. We fought together, and that's what made the difference." Lyra nodded, her eyes softening. "You made them believe in themselves, Jake. You showed them that they didn't have to be afraid, and that's why they followed you." Jake didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't used to hearing praise, and it made him uncomfortable. But he knew that Lyra was right. It wasn't about being the strongest or the most skilled. It was about believing in something, about fighting for a cause greater than yourself. As the days passed, the colony slowly began to return to normal. There was a new sense of unity, a new sense of purpose. The people worked together, building new homes, planting new crops, and caring for one another. The fear of the enemy had been replaced by hope for the future. But there was one thing that remained in Jake's mind. The people of the colony had fought for their survival, but now, with the battle over, what came next? What was the future? For all of them, one evening, as Jake was working on some repairs to the colony's water system, Lyra approached him again. This time, she seemed different, more serious, more contemplative. "Jake," she said, her voice low, "there's something I need to talk to you about." Jake looked up from his work, wiping his hands on a rag. "What is it?" Lyra took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next. You know that I can't stay here forever. My people are still out there, and I need to return to my homeworld. My duty is to my people, and they are waiting for me." Jake's heart sank at her words. He had known that this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. Lyra was a princess, and her place was with her people. He knew that, but still, the thought of losing her left a hollow feeling in his chest. "I understand," Jake said quietly, trying to hide the disappointment in his voice. "You have to go back. Your people need you." Lyra nodded, but her eyes were filled with something else, something deeper. "Jake, I've seen so much in these past weeks. I've learned that there is more to life than power and royalty. There's more to life than what I was raised to believe. I've found something here, something I never expected. I've found something worth fighting for." Jake looked at her, confusion written on his face. "What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated, taking a step closer to him. "I mean you, Jake. I mean the people here, the life that you've built. You've shown me that there's more to a person than their title, their strength, or their lineage. You've shown me that even the smallest and most ordinary people can make a difference. And I've come to realize that I don't want to leave this behind." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying?" Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I don't want to leave you behind. I've come to care for this place, for these people, for you." Jake was speechless. He had never expected this. He had always thought that Lyra, the alien princess, would return to her home and leave him behind. But here she was, standing before him, telling him that she wanted to stay. "You don't have to make this decision alone," Jake said, his voice filled with sincerity. "We'll figure it out together. This is your home too. Now, you belong here as much as anyone else." Lyra smiled, the weight in her eyes lifting. "Thank you, Jake. I think I've finally found where I belong." And so, they stood together, to people who had come from different worlds, but who had found a common purpose. They had fought side by side, and they had won together. Now, they would build a future, not as a princess and a mechanic, but as partners, united in the life they had made together. The colony was no longer just a place where people lived. It was a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of ordinary people to change the course of history. And Jake and Lyra knew that their future was just beginning.